Hi, welcome to this lab. In the last lecture, we discussed about Azure storage security details. We particularly learned about storage account keys and SAS keys. In this lab, we will be creating an account level SAS key and use that SAS key in a small piece of program to access the blob section of storage account. We will list down the containers and also list files in those containers. Before you start this lab, I would request you to start your Visual Studio development environment and launch the Visual Studio in it and get it ready. Once you've done it, we can create an account Sas key. In order to create an account Sas key, go to the storage accounts, click on Rudra storage account or whichever the storage account which you created, and then click on shared access signatures. Here you can able to create account level Sas key. If you remember correctly in our theory lecture, using an account level Sas key, you can delegate access to multiple storage services, that is blob, file, queue, table. But we don't need access to all those things. We need only to blob. So I'm going to remove file, queue and table from allowed services. I'm going to leave the allowed resource types as it is. And from the allowed permissions perspective, I'm going to remove the write and delete and add and create, because we are going to list down the containers and also list down the files. We need access to list permission. And come down here and click on generate Sas key, which will generate the Sas token and the blob service URL. You might have observed this Sas key has a start and expiry date and time. You can also specify the allowed IP addresses. I have left it blank. And you can also specify allowed protocols. I left the default one as HTTPS only. Now we need to launch Visual Studio environment and start writing a program using this generated Sas key. So let's go into our Visual Studio environment. I have already launched it. Let's create a new project. And I'm going to call it as working with Sas keys. And before we start anything, we need to import the appropriate packages. In this case, it is Windows Azure storage packages. So let's include them. Go to browse, type in Windows storage, and you can see the first one is Windows Azure.storage. Let's install it. Now the package has been successfully installed. So let's close this one and also close this one. Now the next thing we need to do is to include the namespaces. Because we are going to use storage, we will include storage namespace. And also because we are going to work with blobs, I'm going to include the namespace associated with blobs. And also lastly, we'll be using storage credentials class. For that, I'm going to include the namespace associated with it. Now we have added the required namespaces. Now the next thing to do is to create the storage credentials class. I'm going to name it as Account Sas. When you're creating a storage credentials instance, you can able to create using the account level Sas key. So if you go through the constructors, you can see the string Sas token. So for that, we need to copy the Sas token from here, and then we just need to paste it here. So we copied that Sas token. I'm going to remove this question mark here. That's it. So we have created a storage credentials class now. Now the next thing is to create a storage account. To do that, we need to use storage account class. I'm going to name it as storage account. New storage account. Here we can provide storage credentials. I'm going to use the fourth constructor associated with it. So if you can see here, we will be providing the storage credential instance that we created earlier, and we are going to create a storage URI using the blob storage URL. So let's do that. First thing is we will mention the account Sas key that we have created. The next thing is to create a storage URI. And that takes a URI. Storage URI nothing but it contains a primary URI and secondary URI. We are going to create only primary URI in this case. Now I'm going to copy the URL from here and then paste it here. And I'm going to leave the remaining URLs as empty. That's it. We have created a storage account. Now if you remember our labs earlier correctly, the next thing we need to create is Cloud Blob client. So now we have created Cloud Blob client. Let's check the reference of this is not empty. And next thing we need to do is to get the containers in that blob client. For that, the first thing we need to do is to create a variable. I'm going to create that. Basically, we are creating a variable to store the list of containers. For that, I'm going to use enumerable with the type Cloud Blob container. I'm going to call it as containers. Now let's fetch the containers from our blob client. This will fetch the list of containers from our blob client. The next thing we need to do is to make sure that the containers is not empty. We will be verifying the containers is not empty. If it is not empty, we will go through each one of them. Item in containers. And the next thing we need to do is to go through each blob in that container. For that, we will be using again for each blob item in item, which is a container dot list blobs. And then what we are going to do is we are going to write to the console the container name and the blob name. Console.write line. First we will write the container name. Basically what this mean is item.uri.segments1. Item is the container, containers URL. If you remember our theory lectures, in the container URL, the last segments in the URI will be the container name. So we are fetching that segment from that URI. And then the next thing is blob name. If you remember correctly, in the blob URI, the first segment will be the container name and the second segment will be blob name. So I'm going to capture the second segment. So we are taking the container name from the first segment in the URI of the container, and we are taking the blob name from the second segment of the blob URI, because the first segment of the blob URI will be the container name. So to make sure that we can read this, I'm going to put console.read key so that it will wait. Okay, we have written a piece of logic that uses the account Sas key to create storage credentials, and then we have created a storage account, and based on the storage account we have created a blob client. Using the blob client, we got the list of containers. For each container we got the list of blobs, and we are displaying in the console. So let's build this to make sure there are no errors. And let's run this to see the output. Now you can see in the container inbox we have name text, name test3, and the name test blobs. So that's it, guys. In this lab we have created an account Sas key and used this account level Sas key to access the blob section of the storage account, and we listed the containers in that blob section and also listed the blobs in that containers. If you want to verify whether the blobs has been displayed correctly or not, you have a choice of going here and then go to Rudra storage account or the storage account which you created, and go to the blob container to verify whether this program has been displaying the containers correctly or not. See you in the next lecture.